Okay, I think I'm live. So this is my first independent Instagram live. I did one with Project Proactive a few weeks ago and that was really fun, but this is my first time trying to go live by myself. So I don't know if anybody is watching because first of all, I don't have that many followers yet, but also I didn't even promote or let anybody know that I was going to be, oh, people are joining, that's exciting. Hi guys. Oh, my kids are joining. Thank you. You're so supportive, guys. I love you. So I didn't advertise or promote the fact that I was going to be talking about, I said I was going to talk about it, but I didn't say when because I didn't know when. I had a cancellation for tonight, so I decided to take advantage. Usually I work in the evenings. So for anyone who didn't see the original announcement, what I wanted to talk about on this live was homeschooling, because this is the time of the year when I often get a lot of phone calls. So nice to see those colorful hearts coming. Thank you. When I often get a lot of phone calls from families, parents, sometimes teenage children who are considering homeschooling. They started the school year, something's not working for them, or different reasons that people just want to reevaluate how they're educating their children. And I get a lot of the same questions over and over again, sometimes practically because they actually want to know things that they can do, sometimes just hypothetically, sometimes just socially, people are curious. So my kids laugh because they've just heard this spiel so many times. We've discussed it at at dinner tables and social interactions, and I just kind of figured if I put all the information, the useful information that I have in one place as much as I could think of, then this could be a resource for people who have these questions. So I hope I'm going to get to cover as much as I can. There is, I had asked for questions. People sent in some really great questions. Unfortunately, because I am still learning the ropes with Instagram, I wasn't able to save all of them, but I saved some of them, and I added a couple that I just tend to get a lot. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to read through all the questions. So that way, anybody who is joining and not sure whether this is of interest to you, or just going to tune into the video afterwards, and they want to know, what's going to be covered, you could figure out whether this is actually worth your time or whether it's actually not what you're looking to know. So I'm going to read out the questions from this list that I have. That's pretty much all I have in the way of notes, plus a little article on the side of my computer screen that I once started writing about homeschooling and I never finished. So I may refer to that too, but really I'm going to do this mostly off the cuff. Okay, so there's about 10 or 12 questions. The first one is, why did you decide to homeschool? The second one is, how did you inform your children's schools that you were going to be homeschooling? Was that uncomfortable? Was that a hard thing to do? The next one is, do you teach everything yourself, or do you hire tutors, or are there other ways that your children learn? Do they go to classes? Another one is, what do you do about your children socializing and having friends? Another one is, how do you know what you want to teach or what you need to teach for every subject, especially for Judaic studies? I know that some people who follow this account are not necessarily Jewish or Orthodox. I am Orthodox Jewish. A lot of my friends and people, I hate the word followers, a lot of people that I know from Instagram are as well. So I'm going to reference the fact that we do this yeshiva style, which means we do a dual curriculum of Torah, biblical studies, and general studies, but I'll try to remember to translate as I go along for anybody who doesn't speak Hebrew or isn't familiar with the culture. Another question is, do you ever find that your children are bored with the extra time that they invariably have by learning at home? Do they get cabin fever from learning in the place where they live? These are all really good questions. How do you deal with naysayers, people who judge you and your family, people who think you're weird, people who think you're damaging your children by educating this way? Next question is, don't you work? Yes, I do. How do you homeschool your children and maintain your job, your practice, and also write? What about time for yourself? If your kids are always around, isn't that hard for you? Do you worry about your children's future, higher education, dating? What are the challenges you face from when you're homeschooling different from regular schooling? What are the advantages? And what is entailed if you decide that you want to homeschool your child? What's that step? Like, what do you have to do to make it official and legal? Okay, so that's what I'm going to try to focus on. I don't know if we'll get to everything tonight because really we could probably spend many hours going through all of these topics, but I'm not going to. I'm hoping to keep it under an hour unless people add a lot of questions. It's so nice that people are sending waves. I'm waving back to everyone. Thank you. So I'm just going to go in order of those questions. The first question is, why did we decide to homeschool? So before I answer that question, I just want to reassure my children who are watching and my children who aren't watching that when we discussed the idea of me doing this live, I asked the kids, A, if they were okay with me doing it, B, if there was anything they wanted me to specifically say or not say, and C, if they wanted to be a part of it. They said that they were not interested in participating in it, and that's cool. They also said that they're very happy with me sharing information about homeschooling, but they didn't want me to get very specific about them individually or anything that's like personal to our family, which I probably wouldn't have done anyway, but I do want to be specifically aware of and sensitive to share in a way that would be relevant and interesting to other families, not specifically to get into the nitty-gritty of my own particular kids. So in terms of why we decided to homeschool, so there are, people ask this question from I think 3 different angles. Sometimes it's from a place of admiration, wow, that's so fascinating, that's so cool that you do this, tell me about it. Maybe they're interested in doing it themselves, or they're just think it's cool to do that. Sometimes they're just, curious, polite, oh, you do that, how come? And sometimes people ask it from a place of sort of contempt and condemnation. And depending on the tone and the context and the relationship of the question, we're going to address it differently. But I'm assuming that the question that we're talking about here is really coming from a place of purpose, kind of understanding the ideology about it, and if people are actually interested in exploring it for their own families. So the real answer is that we chose to homeschool our children for the same reason that a lot of people choose to send their kids to a particular school, if you have school choice, that you send them to a brick and mortar school, which is that we are looking for the most optimal educational and psychological and social and ideological childhood experience that they can have. We did not always homeschool. This was something that we came to sort of by process of, I don't want to say elimination, but trial and error is probably a better way to put it. Some people want to hear that we have some sort of concrete reason. We're a military family and we're on the move, or there are disabilities that can't be taken care of in other schools. And those are actually perfectly great reasons to homeschool, but they don't happen to be our reasons. Our kids had places in schools. They were performing nicely. They were performing well academically. They were integrated socially, thank God. But as they got older and further into the system, we started observing and analyzing what the system is, the educational system, the American education system, the yeshiva systems that we were part of. We were critiquing. And to be in full disclosure, I was a teacher for about a decade in the yeshiva system. So I really was able to see an insider perspective on sort of what goes on there. Okay, so, and a lot of what goes on there is great. I'm not trying to fearmonger here, just kind of scrolling down these questions. There are 2 impetus categories for homeschooling. One is the advantages of customized education programs, and number 2 is the drawbacks of the institutionalized schooling systems. We started to research the advantages because of the drawbacks. But not everything is going to be perfect in homeschool either. Life choices are going to be a cost-benefit calculation, and then we just try to make the best choices that we can. So for us, we felt that we could offer the children more personal, more focused, more expedient, more tailored to their interests. When your kid is in a school where they're one of 10 or 15 or 20 or 25 students in a classroom, the classroom has to be taught, the class has to be taught to a large group. So often they teach to the top, sometimes they teach to the middle. Occasionally they'll slow it down for the slower learners, but it's almost impossible to cater to everybody at the same time because there are people who learn differently, there are people they learn at different paces, they learn in different styles, and you're kind of mass producing the educational product. In our particular case, the yeshivas in our communities they're limited. They can only hire who's available to hire. So sometimes they get people with a lot of talent, people with a lot of backgrounds, a lot of training, and sometimes they get people who are sort of fresh out of college. Sometimes they have people who are still in college that are teaching. It's very challenging for the schools, to keep up with the demands of the number of students that there are, the different subjects that there are, and they're kind of limited in what they can offer. Some of them do a beautiful job. It depends on the school, it depends on the year, and it depends on how many classes they have to fill up with teachers. Okay. So, but actually, it wasn't even the academics that really that really drew us to this. It was more like the personal stuff. Okay, so how did you tell your kids' schools, and was it uncomfortable? So the way we told our kids' schools was honestly and respectfully. We just sort of, in different cases, sometimes we would make a phone call, sometimes we sent a very grateful email, just thanking them for what they had been able to provide our family or our children with, and explaining in a general way why we felt that we wanted to make this move. We wanted to leave doors open. We still choose to leave doors open in case our kids, this decision, by the way, was made collaboratively with our children. We decided with them that it was their choice. We would never have forced this upon them. At any point, they know that they are free to come to us and say, I want to go back to a regular school, and we would send them. We have done that, and we would do it again. So that was how we made the decision. There was a lot more that went into it, but it was basically ideological. It was educational. It was psychological. It was social, which sounds funny. I'll get to the social stuff soon. But for all different reasons, there were benefits that we analyzed, and we found that sometimes I would complain to friends about certain things that were bothering me in my kids' schools at different times, and people would say, "Oh, okay, Alicia, but you think you could do better?" And I didn't really want to say it. I only said it to people who I felt like I could get away with saying this to. But I'm like, I do feel like I could do better. I've been a teacher, so I know how to teach. So was it uncomfortable? No, it wasn't uncomfortable. Most of the time, the people that we spoke to were very receptive, very understanding. And again, they had their reactions, they ran the same gamut, the same range as regular people's, which is either wow, that's really courageous or interesting of you to do that, or good for you, that's such a beautiful thing. There were some educators, even principals, who said, oh my gosh, it would be my dream to be able to do that for my own children. Very honest. Teachers who said that because they also understand the drawbacks of sort of mass education. And then there were people who said are you sure you want to do that? That might not be right. It's going to be so hard to mainstream them back in if there's the judgments, and we'll get to that as well. But overall, the decision to do it happened over time. We did a lot of research. We spoke to people. We prayed a lot. We did a lot of soul searching. We discussed it with the children. And then when we discussed it with the schools, we sort of wanted to leave the door open, and we did feel that we were leaving doors open in case we needed to. So that was not a problem for us. Okay, next question. Do we teach everything ourselves, or do we hire tutors? So there have been a combination of different ways that we've done it. For the most part, because like I said, I was in the field of education, I felt comfortable to sort of design the curriculum, and then sometimes I would bring in, let's say there was one child I brought in a math tutor to teach her, because we just felt like that would be a better choice. And there are extracurriculars. They go out of the house to things like gymnastics and tennis and ballet, the same way that kids who go to school will sometimes do that extracurricularly after school, or they'll do it in the school. But I don't know how to teach all those things. So we have specialty teachers to do that. Their general core curriculum classes, overall, I would say either I've done it with them, sometimes my husband will do a little bit with them, and sometimes they're what we call autodidactic, because my kids are not little at this point. My youngest is 12, and they've learned through the use of textbooks, workbooks, online programs to sort of teach themselves. So very often, for example, I'll spend 5-10 minutes teaching one of the kids a new math skill, and then they'll spend the next 5, 10, 15 minutes doing a few pages worth of problems just to make sure they understand it. We'll check to make sure they get them right. And we'll go forward. So there is a little bit of instruction, but then a lot of independent coursework. But it really depends on the subject. So some subjects we do together. Judaic study subjects I enjoy doing with them. Biblical subjects I did. That was the primary stuff that I would teach at the high school level. So I very much enjoy doing that with my children. It's a relationship building, and we launch into ideological, philosophical, worldview conversation. So that's something that I view as a privilege. Okay, so that's whether we teach ourselves or hire. So yeah, you could do all or any, or a combination. What do you do about socializing and friends? So this is a really important issue if you're homeschooling. So for us, it wasn't a big deal because we're in a community where there are a lot of families with kids of different ages. It's hard to go, more than a few houses without bumping into families with kids. So the kids had already been in school. They'd made friends. They're in a community with a lot of kids. They're involved in the synagogue and the shul. And so it is sort of the burden or the responsibility of the homeschooling family to maintain connections, social connections with friends. There actually is a very strong network in my community of homeschooling families. There's a whole WhatsApp chat. specifically Jewish Orthodox homeschooling families, and then even a broader network of just any homeschooling families in the area. There's a Yahoo email group, and there's a WhatsApp chat. So sometimes they have social meetups. Like I said, my kids really maintain most of their friendships from their school friends, from their friends who had been in school. But it is a great option to join communities of homeschooling groups that get together for classes, for co-ops, for extracurriculars. There's a parkour that's very popular among the homeschooling groups. So that's, but it definitely is something that a parent who's homeschooling children should be on top of, especially if you have younger children. You don't want them to get in the habit of just sort of like curling up in the house and avoiding people. You want them. But the truth is that's something that parents should be aware of if you send your kids to school too, because kids who go to school can have social anxiety, and they can suffer from, bullying, or feeling like, they're not in the right clique, or they're not in any clique, or they're sitting alone at lunch. So really, it's not easy to socialize when you're growing up as it is. This creates a different sort of challenge, although I remember I had one daughter who switched to homeschooling in 8th grade, and she came to me once and she said that she actually felt that she was able to be more herself and have more friends homeschooling in 8th grade than she had in 6th and 7th grade, because in 6th to 7th grade it was like, it's junior high to middle school. There were like all the politics. If you sit with this group at lunch, then you're not really hanging out with that group, and then if you're friends with that kid who's in a fight with that kid. So it was like much more like political and complicated, and when you're in this like big building full of children, whereas once she started homeschooling, she was sort of able to just call and get together with whomever she wanted, on the basis of just her liking people and them liking her back. So her social life actually expanded when she started homeschooling. So that was kind of nice. But like all kids, they go through their different seasons of having tons of kids to hang out with, and then sort of like narrowing it down to the 2 or 3 really good friends. And for us, it's been pretty normative. But like I said, it's definitely something that requires attention. Another way that they socialize is through extracurriculars. So we try, like our system, that you don't have to do it this way, but I like them to have some sort of an art, like music, some kinds of music, or like art, like a painting type of thing, and also like creative things, and some sort of athletic or physical activity. So let's say tennis, gymnastics, basketball, ballet. Any opportunity that they have to like get out, move their body, socialize in a way that they're learning how to build strength or grace or athleticism. So that's another way that they maintain friendships. And the music stuff tends to be more one-on-one. We usually have music teachers come to the house for piano and guitar and violin, things like that. That's usually more one-on-one. But they've also participated in concerts. There's this big harmony concert in our neighborhood where they have been able to be in like big group dances and choirs and things like that. So socializing and friends are something that has to be attended to. But if you live in a community where there are kids, it's not that hard to do. You just have to be proactive. Next question. How do you know what to teach for each subject, especially for Judaic studies? So I'm going to start with the not Judaic studies, because that's simpler. So with the internet, it just is so incredibly easy. If you want to go like totally easy, there are websites like timeforlearning.com, time4learning. There's actually a website called howtohomeschoolforfree.com that has like dozens, maybe even hundreds of links to like different resources and curricula and programs that you can utilize for teaching. Let's see, there's just so many. There's basically, if you want to do an online school program, there's usually these like all-in-one packages that are not very expensive. Sometimes they're even free, and you can start with that, and then you either purchase extra materials for enrichment, or if you want to, or for a resource, whatever you want to do there. My kids happen to have preferred learning from actual textbooks and workbooks, so we did a lot of that. But you kind of just find the grade level that your kid is up to, not necessarily the chronological age grade level that they are, although obviously that's a good place to start. But if you see that the grade level that they're up to is something that's too easy for them, you can move up, or if it's something that they haven't mastered yet, you can move down a grade. That's part of the beauty of homeschooling. You're not boxed into like based on the year they were born and what all the other people that were born that date of manufacture are covering. You can slow it down or speed it up or zoom in on something of interest to them based on based on their learning styles, based on what's interesting to them. And based on where they're up to. If they master something really quickly, you can move ahead. If they are having a hard time with something, you can afford to sit with it for a while until they get it, as opposed to, and when you're learning with a lot of kids, you don't always have that luxury. Okay, next question. Do you ever find that your kids are bored with the extra time they have at home? or they get cabin fever from learning in the place that they live. So actually, there was another question that I didn't include on the list, which is what's the schedule like? So again, my house has its own way of doing this. Some people unschool, which is like very organic, very based on like children's curiosity and real life experience learning. Some people just kind of like translate the curriculum from the schools into their home. And a lot of people do sort of a combination where there is structure, but they get creative with it. And we've done all of the above. So when you're doing private learning, you get things done in a much quicker time. So if you're sending your kid to a public school, they're going to be in school from, let's say, 8:30 to 3. We sent to yeshiva, so they were in school from like 8:30 to 4:30 or 5:30. It's a long day. We can get a lot more done because you're not sitting around for the teacher, like in each class, waiting for the teacher to get quiet, waiting to go over the homework, collecting all the sheets, distributing all the paper. You don't realize how much fat you trim off the time of the learning. So very often we can get our work done anywhere between like an hour and a half and 3 hours, usually less than 3 hours, usually like 1 to 2 hours. Not counting extracurriculars. Obviously, if they're doing extracurriculars, that's going to take however long the course is. But just to do their mandatory learning, it's not really going to take more than 3 hours on any given day. So what are they going to do with the rest of this time? So it's a challenge and it's a blessing. So it's a blessing because they really have the opportunity to figure out what they want to do. So most kids are leading a fairly uniform existence for the majority of their waking hours until 12th grade, right? They're waking up in the morning, they're going in this big yellow bus to like a place where everybody's doing the same thing as them. And whether they love literature, hate literature, love math or hate math, whether they're ever going to use that stuff again or not, they have to like know it and regurgitate it for tests and then come home and do the same thing again. So when you school in a more customized way, you have the luxury to ask yourself, like, what more do I want to learn about? What more do I want to explore? What more would I enjoy? So obviously they can't just like sit and watch TV all day. That's not going to fly. But they do have time for recreational reading and viewing and listening. They get a lot more fresh air. We try to go out at least once a day. They have a lot more time to exercise. I know in our local yeshivas, the kids definitely do not spend enough time moving their bodies. They don't get a lot of fresh air. It's getting better, but it still could do with a lot of improvement. So, that's something that we do, we try to really do daily. They've been able to study foreign languages. They've been not necessarily as masterfully as one might hope, but they've had exposure. We travel. So they've cultivated their own. One of my kids has like a lot of interest in culinary and domestic. She likes to organize. She likes to cook and bake. And of course they can socialize. Also, they have cousins overseas in Europe and in Israel, and they can FaceTime with them and they can learn with them. So, basically when you have more hours in the day, you have more of an opportunity to get to know yourself, to volunteer, to work a little bit. They get all the babysitting gigs during the daytime, so they put away a little money. They volunteer their time for causes that are meaningful to them, and they enjoy each other. Like, I really believe that. I mean, thank God my kids get along really well with each other, and I think one of the reasons is that they're really friends. And they play. Play is an incredibly important and underratedly formative activity in terms of even, educational and psychological development, like just the ability to play games and to be creative. So are they ever bored? Probably, but they've learned not to tell me when they're bored, because if they tell me they're bored, I'll just give them more, learning things to do. So they've learned to sort of occupy themselves with pro-social and educational and useful, productive things to do. And yes, sometimes they waste time too, just like every other kid. And then they socialize in the evenings when their friends are around. Okay. Do they get bored with the extra time? Probably not as much as one might think. And it is a challenge of a homeschooling parent to make sure that there are, wholesome, productive things that kids can do with their time. And do they get cabin fever from learning in the place where they live? Possibly, yeah. So that's why we do try to go out, and sometimes just the errands that you have to run as as someone who's maintaining a home, orthodontist appointments. We always, everywhere we go, it's like we're so spoiled because we're always the only ones there. When we go ice skating or when we go to the dentist or whatever, we never have to wait because we try to make our appointments and our activities in the middle of the day. So we always have like things to ourselves, which is really fun. Unless sometimes we invite people to join us. Not to the orthodontist, but to ice skating or boating or surfing or whatever, that kind of stuff. So we do try to get out on a daily basis. How do you deal with people who judge you and your family or think you weird? The same way that any healthy person deals with judgments from everybody else. You're not going to be, not everyone's going to like you. Not everyone's going to agree with your worldview, with your approach to parenting, with your approach to living, with your approach to religion, with the fact that we may or may not have a very messy house, which is my fault. So we're imperfect people, but we're doing something that we believe in here. And so, most of the time we get a lot of love. We get a lot of, it's a great conversation piece. There's a lot of opportunity to connect with people and to inform people. I wish I had known about this when I was a younger mom. That's part of the reason I really wanted to do this video, is that I really want this to be a resource for people who are considering it and don't know where to start. But yeah, so there are going to be people who say mean things. So if they're saying critical things that make sense, and they're people that I care about in my life because I have a meaningful relationship with them, or they're doing it in a public forum and I want to defend the honor of what we're doing, or my children or families like ours, then I can debate, very well, and I have no problem doing that. But most of the time I just kind of let judges judge, because I'm not here to change the world in that way. I try to raise my children in a way that gives them the opportunity to just self-actualize, and that speaks for themselves. People are going to criticize any school system, but if they're producing kids that are happy and healthy and well-adjusted and well-educated and have opportunities, then that speaks for itself. People think we're weird, so they could think we're weird. They don't have to hang out with us. Thank God we have a lot of friends. We have a lot of people who are happy to hang out with us, and you don't have to please everybody. It's a great lesson for kids to learn, and grown-ups. Okay, don't you work? Yes, I do. How do you homeschool your kids and maintain your practice and write? So for people who don't, people know each other from different contexts. I have a private practice. I'm an LMFT, licensed marriage and family therapist. I also write and lecture. So I do have a busy professional life. I don't know if I could have done what I do if I were homeschooling my kids when they were tiny. I mean, I probably could have, but I would have had to delegate more of it. So the way I remember exactly when I figured this out, because I was teaching, and at that time I was teaching and making a salary, and then I was using that salary to pay my kids' tuition, and it was the whole thing just felt so silly, because I was working to make money to pay other people to educate my children more poorly than I could educate them, and it was frustrating to me. And I was in grad school because I knew I wanted to be a therapist. And so at a certain point, we were on vacation. I was reading this book on time management, and I thought I had to make a choice about whether I wanted to quit my job to homeschool the children, or just let my practice grow and leave the kids in school. And I was reading this book about how working moms are able to prioritize time for family and for other things they want to do while still building their businesses. And it was this light bulb moment of, oh my gosh, I could do both. It doesn't have to be a binary decision. I can have my practice, I can build my career, and I can still homeschool the children. So just by way of example, what I do is I see 2 or 3 clients in the morning. I usually work from 8 to 11 or 8:30 to 11:30. I usually work in the morning. Then we do our schooling from late morning or early afternoon for a few hours. Then we have regular family time, going out, shopping, cooking, doing regular things, domestic things or recreational things. And then I go back into session in the evening generally. So from 7 or 8 till around 10. So I don't work a 9 to 5 job. I don't work 8 hours a day, but I can easily work 6 hours a day, because if you think of it, there's 168 hours in the week. You sleep for a certain amount of them. But if you allocate your waking hours per day, I could end up working 20 to 30 or sometimes even 35 hours a week and still homeschooling my kids for about 3 hours a day while still having time to do other things as well. It's just a matter of really having learned time management. It's not something that came naturally to me. It was something that I actually had to learn. I actually credit Laura Vanderkam, the author that I learned it from. I don't use this phrase lightly, but it was life-changing reading her books and applying them. I learned about it from a client, and I'm so grateful that I did, because it really gave me the ability to do very passionate things for me with my day. I was able to see as many clients as I wanted to see, participate in continuing education, educate, supervise, write my blog, write my book, and also have a lot of time with the family. So it was really a dream come true, and I love telling people this story because there's so many people who feel especially moms, who feel they need to make this choice of sacrifice their career or their dreams or their hopes of things that they want to accomplish and put that on hold because they want to raise their family. And if that's something people want to do because they want to do it, that's really beautiful. But you could sometimes have both. if you set it up right, and you get really lucky with it. So so I do work. It works out well for us. And I like that my children see that you can be super dedicated to your family and also super excited and ambitious about your career. Okay, next question. What about time for, important piece is I have a home office. So I could do this if I had an office outside the home, but it would just be a little bit more hectic for me because I would be driving back and forth. But here, I have an office in the front of my house. It is private. They don't disturb. They can't hear anything. But that happens to be, a really good setup for us. What about time for yourself? If your kids are always around, isn't that hard for you? So to me, that feels like a funny question because when I was working and the kids were in school, I had less time for myself because I had babies. So I would get up in the morning early, frantic, run, get everybody off to carpools or school buses or drop-offs, where they had to be. Then I would fly into work, hoping my clothing wasn't inside out. And then by the time I finished work, I would have to run around picking everybody up again and then try to throw together some version of supper. So there was no discretionary time at that point either. Full-time moms, right, if you have young children, also don't have any natural me time, so whether you're a working parent or working out of the home parent or working by being a parent, if you're dedicated to your children, then chances are, nature abhors a vacuum. You're going to not have time for yourself unless you creatively and proactively carve time for yourself. And that's something that can sometimes be done, but you need support. So let's say for me, I have no shame in admitting that I don't do a whole lot of housework. I hire someone who comes for about 4 hours a day and does most of the housework for us. I don't cook fancy meals. We actually do have time to make nicer meals. I just don't like to cook. So my kids, my daughter who enjoys working in the kitchen, sometimes makes nicer things. But there are things that fall by the wayside. I don't do a whole lot of clothing shopping because I hate clothing shopping. Probably if I wanted to, I could. I learned to exercise. I used to hate exercise. I still hate exercising, but I've gotten in the habit of exercising because I'm getting older and I need to. And also it's a value and I want my children to take care of their bodies. So basically I know this sounds like a cliche and I don't always practice what I preach, but I believe in this, is that when you learn time management, you end up putting in the priorities and making time for the things that matter. And sometimes things fall by the wayside when there are emergencies. But I definitely recommend, if anybody here struggles with time management, whether you're a homeschooler or not, whether you're a parent, whether you're working, whatever it is, it's Laura Vanderkam's stuff is fantastic for that. Sorry. Okay. Next question. What about time for yourself? Oh no, sorry, that was the last question. Do you worry about your kids' future, higher education, dating, things like that? So I don't so much worry about it as think about it and plan for it. I guess we all worry, regular worry, but so the way we set up their homeschooling was at every stage I tried to be very cognizant of what their peers were doing in the regular schools, or in my case the yeshiva schools in our neighborhood. So the Judaic studies, I have tried to follow the general curriculum that was being followed in the yeshivas that they had been in, so that if at any point they wanted to stream back in, they would at least be at the place that their peers were, and we were able to do that. Once it became clear that we were doing this homeschooling thing not so much experimentally, but as something that we really wanted to stick with and were loving and enjoying and getting better at and more confident with, and it was just really taking off for us, then I was able to be a little bit more creative with curriculum, sort of designing and strategizing and giving ourselves more license to deviate based on what they wanted to learn and what we wanted to explore. But I'm still very cognizant of the idea of wanting them to be able to go to college. I do have kids that are old enough for college. I have kids that are in college and one who's going to be starting soon. So it's not that hard to get into college. If they wanted to go to really prestigious Ivy League colleges, then we would set them up along that trajectory. It's not hard to do that. In fact, homeschoolers tend to do quite well in higher education. That's not specifically a value that we have, but if they want, if that could be another live about why I think that higher education is a little bit of a scam. But I do want them to at least get a bachelor's so that they have the opportunity to study the professions if they so desire. So it's something that we plan for. It's something that we strategize for. It's much easier than people realize. In terms of dating, so they don't date right now. But my kids will probably date when they want to get married. And no, I don't worry about them dating because they're healthy, confident, intelligent, psychologically savvy people, and God willing, I hope at the right time they'll find people that are appropriate and compatible for them. And if there are people who don't want to date them because they homeschool, then I'm so happy to be able to rule those people out and not have them waste time vetting for that sort of mindset. Next question: what are the challenges that you face when homeschooling different from regular schooling? So I guess at the beginning, the challenges were learning what I needed to do, just practically speaking in terms of logistics, paperwork, setting things up. We always sit down at the end of August, beginning of September to figure out what each kid is going to do for each subject, for their extracurriculars, for their social outlets, figuring out... There really aren't so many challenges. It's awesome, I have to say. It's kind of like the tasks that we're focused on. I'm trying to think if there are other challenges. I guess like maintaining their social lives, that's something that we have to do. But like I said, when my older kids went to schools, it was also like on the weekends making sure that they made plans with the people that they wanted to spend time with, helping them navigate, the mean kids in school and figure out, when they were feeling insecure from other children. I mean, that really is the same, the same psychological and social development that any kid goes through. I guess just the responsibility. When you're a homeschooling parent, their entire scholastic responsibility lies on your shoulders. The thing is that I really found that when my kids were in school, so much of the scholastic responsibility fell on my shoulders anyway. So I know a lot of my friends feel the same way. They're busy, either helping their kids keep up or calling teachers at night. So I don't know. I'm sure there are challenges that are different from regular schooling, but they're so minute compared to the advantages that I'm not even really thinking of them right now. And we've been fortunate, I'm sure there are other families who homeschool. I'm just sharing based on my experience. What are the advantages? So many. We live in a religious community. In religious communities, style and standards and modality of religious belief and adherence is a humongous deal. It's a really big deal for people, especially when it comes to parenting, especially when it comes to exposure and living a life that's in harmony with your values. So for us, one of the challenges was, a lot of the schools had become a little more extreme. They change the rules on you every so often. So for example, one school that we were in at the time that we joined didn't have this rule. While we were there, they had this rule like you can't make bat mitzvah parties anymore. And it's funny because we actually don't like making parties. We opted not to make bar and bat mitzvah parties because we just don't enjoy parties. But I didn't like the idea of someone telling me that I can't make a bar or bat mitzvah party. And it's not a big deal. If we loved everything else about a school, we would deal with their rules. But the concept of having your ideological or philosophical or spiritual life legislated by an institution was something that we weren't so excited about. So creating our own value system, our own belief system, our own open-minded approach to learning about the world, about people in the world, about theology, about practice, about priorities. This is something that is an incredible opportunity for my husband and me, and for the children, for ways that we process, and we've grown as a family. We've adapted. We've become more nuanced, more sophisticated, I hope, and the customization of being able, I don't just mean academic customization, although that is a huge advantage, but even just in terms of interests and abilities, and being able to zoom in on what kids really want to know and learn about is fantastic. In terms of family relationships, it's wonderful because if your parent is your teacher, it's like the difference between a waiter serving food or a mom nursing her child. I mean, the learning style is so much more organic, so much more in real time and wholesome. And there's love mixed into it too, so that's awesome. There's a financial advantage because when you send to private schools, you're spending a lot of money on that, and we're not spending that money on private schools. So that frees up a lot of our income for things like travel. We've done a ton of travel. I mean, that's just something that we were able to do because of our jobs. We weren't always able to do that. But because of the way we work now, we both work for ourselves, so we structure our time in such a way that world schooling is a big part of being exposed to other cultures, other languages, and we're really, really grateful to be able to do that for our kids. yeah, so many advantages. And like I said, even socially, the kids, because they're not pinned down and they're not like pigeonholed or labeled as like, oh, you go to that school, you're that kind of kid. They have a broader spectrum of people with whom they feel comfortable to socialize and identify. Okay, what's entailed in officially making the decision and doing it legally? So it's different in each state, and it might even be different per district, but I think mostly it's legislated by state. New York is one of the stricter states as far as homeschooling goes. There are some that are a little bit stricter, but what you have to do is there is a Department of Homeschooling in Manhattan. My husband actually used to work in the building of the New York City Department of Homeschooling, so he would like drop off the paperwork. Now you can actually submit it online, which is even easier. So you send in what they call a letter of intent. Officially, you're supposed to send it in July, but really you can send it in whenever you make the decision to homeschool. Just you don't want to send it in like too long after you've been homeschooling, because then you're guilty of truancy. So if your kids are not in school and they're not officially registered to homeschool, and somebody found out about that, that would be breaking a law. So you want to make sure that you're filling that gap. Like if you homeschool, like if you start your school year and your kid decides, or you decide that your kid can stop going to school, you want to send in that letter of intent right away. You can just Google the email address, where do I send a letter of intent to homeschool in New York State? And it'll come right up. It'll be a .gov address probably. And that would be, so that's how you start. Then you have to send an IHIP. IHIP stands for Individual Home Instruction Plan, and they send you a bunch of paperwork telling you, kind of walking you through it. The first time you get it, it's like very overwhelming. It has all these like laws and statutes and corollaries and stuff, but really it's not as complicated as it looks. You basically just have to go through the core subjects that everybody knows that kids study. It's English language arts and history and science and mathematics and some sort of phys ed and some sort of health ed, sex ed, the basic stuff, that however you want to do that. And make sure that and explain like what you plan to cover and what materials you plan to use. It doesn't have to be very specific. They really do trust you on this. If you think of some of the schools that there are out there that are doing sorry, I'm just laughing at these really sweet comments that people are leaving. Thank you. That some schools do, a phenomenal job, providing enrichment and advancement and stuff. And some schools do, more of a minimalist job. So really you can give just a minimalist, like, oh, we want to use the Spectrum series for grade 7 level pre-algebra mathematics. Like, you don't have to say a whole lot. They just want to know that you're doing something that's structured. Then that's the IHIP. So you have the letter of intent, you have the IHIP, and then you have quarterly reports. So the quarterly reports, and in the paperwork that they mail you, it tells you exactly what you need to send in. I think the first year they actually even gave us the like blank ones to fill in, but I might be mistaken. It could be I got that from like one of the websites that we use to research. And by the way, you can find, if you spend like a day or two Googling around different like homeschooling sites and information, there's like, the internet is so awesome for this stuff. You could find so much, including, by the way, Judaic, Jewish people and families and resources and organizations that make themselves available for homeschooling families. So the quarterly reports are once a quarter, 4 times a year. You send in their paperwork. Now I think you can do it. I've been doing it by mail, but you can do it online now too. I just found out last year that at the end of last year is you can send in, you email in, this is what we covered, this is how many hours we covered. Nobody shows up at your door to audit this, so it's kind of an honor system. Again, just like schools are an honor system, the city is not like running into schools to make sure that how many, well, not yet, to see how many hours you covered or how much material you covered. At the end of the year, you can hire someone to test your children so that you have proof paperwork to show, like, my child's mastered his or her grade level. You can do an online testing. You can do your own testing. Again, this is not something that's mandated by the state. I like to do some sort of an informal or formal testing just because it makes me feel good to know that my kid is at or above grade level. It just makes me breathe easier, and fortunately we always have been. So so that's something that you can do, but you don't need to. And that's pretty much, there's probably a little bit more to it, but I think that's a pretty good broad brush explanation of, kind of going through all of the questions that I got. If anybody, I see there are a nice number of people on this live, so thank you so much for joining. It's really been so nice to talk to you about this. If anybody wants to just type in any other follow-up questions, either right now or afterwards, I'm happy to answer them now, or I'm happy to, collect questions and do sort of a follow-up, either article or another live or some sort of video. Anyone? Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming, and good luck with wishing you all a wonderful academic, scholastic, psychological, personal, spiritual year of all kinds. Take care. Now, how do I end this? Probably press end.
How do we begin to actually